Let me be completely honest with you for a sec, because I love being cynical and sarcastic and snarky, the whole lot. I love it. I was born that way. And also, I'm exhausted. And right now, it seems like the only defense against everything that's happening. But I'm also aware that cynicism is killing me. And you too. And all of us. Because cynicism starts like this.
You can't make a tomlet without breaking some Greggs.
And that's objectively funny. I mean, Succession has turned cynicism into a high art. And then it becomes kind of like this.
Glasses, that's smart. Cry in secret. Hide all your emotions. And thus emerge victorious as the winner of the funeral.
Which, still very funny, but weird, Roman. Also weird. And then it becomes this.
No real person involved. You know, it's nothing.
And that's it. That's where it's killing us. Because in the cynic's eyes, we all end up being not real people. We all end up not mattering. It also lets the Logan Roys, the billionaires, the politicians, the advertisers, the platforms, you know the list, do what they want. They are entrepreneurs of this poisonous kind of cynicism. They profit off all of it. And we have shrugged ourselves out of the game. Because it was funny and smart at first to do, but now it's leaving our futures in the hands of the worst kinds of people. And this business model, as I'm going to argue, is killing us. So what is this poisonous kind of cynicism? And what can we do about it? But first, what is cynicism? Without arguing about Oxford versus Webster versus Macquarie, yes, Australia has its own crappy version of the Oxford Dictionary, here's the broad outline. Cynicism is a distrust of human sincerity and motives, the belief that people are fundamentally self-interested and that expressions of goodwill or of idealism are masks for selfishness. At the bottom, it's all selfishness. And from that, a doubt that meaningful change is worthwhile or even possible within the world. The cynics believe that things are the way they are, and anybody who thinks otherwise is naive. Now, notice something dodgy about that. The modern cynic almost never presents it in that order. They don't start with people are selfish and then work outwards. Often they start with claims about how the world just is, that's just how things work, that's just the market, that's just politics, and then present those as objective facts that happen to prove something about human nature. They move in the opposite direction. And they don't call themselves cynics either. They call themselves realists or objectivists or, God forbid, reasonableists.
Why does the cult call themselves the reasonableists?
Well, they figure if people criticize them, it'll seem like they're attacking something very reasonable.
That's weirdly brilliant.
And if you've watched our ideology video, and I'll put a link to it, you'll recognize what's happening here. It's an ideology presenting itself as a reality. It's pinning down certain definitions while discarding the others. Not through argument, not through philosophy, but through our worst feelings about what other people are like. And it's effective. If you've ever driven in peak hour traffic, you know that people can be real shits sometimes. But that's a feeling, not an argument. And cynicism is very, very good at dressing up feelings as what looks like logic. The cynic gets to be right without ever arguing their case, and if we disagree, then the burden is on us to prove differently. It's a bit of a rigged game. But first, when looking at cynicism, we need to recognise that a crime has been committed, that something has been stolen. Because the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that cynicism means its exact opposite. And I'll be quick on this because many of you will have heard and be sick of me talking about the ancient Greek philosophers, but they were the original cynics. And then, cynicism didn't mean people are awful and everything's bad, but being a skeptic, challenging the pretensions of the great and the powerful, and showing how the reality of them didn't live up to the rhetoric. And the original version of this was just so much stranger and braver and more dangerous than anything we mean by it today, that it's almost hard to believe that we still use the same word. Diogenes of Cinna was the most famous, but there were many cynics. And in many ways, the cynics were the template for all philosophers to follow, and did follow subsequently. They did things like, in other words, not taking something at face value, but diving deeper and seeing if the claim actually matched up with the evidence. What the cynics also added on top of that was very important was a willingness and a courage to speak truth to power when it was wrong, which sounds about as far from modern cynicism as you can get. Because our version doesn't live in a barrel and dedicate its life to exposing hypocrisy like Diogenes did. Instead, it says that everybody's a hypocrite. What did you expect? So why bother trying to get to the bottom of things in the first place? Where Diogenes built his life into a protest against hypocrisy, we've turned cynicism into a bit of a permission slip to accept the hypocrisy and to feel clever about having noticed it. Same bullshit detection on the surface, sure, but completely opposite response underneath. One does something about it, but the other uses the seeing through it as a reason to do nothing. And that's what makes it so hard to spot, because both versions from the outside kind of look the same. Radical and clever, sophisticated even, but one of them costs you something and the other one is completely free and a little bit useless. So what happened there? If the original meaning of cynicism has been stolen from us, then where's our great Heist movie for cynicism? Well, we do have it, but it's not a heist movie, sorry, but a 1983 book by the German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk called The Critique of Cynical Reason, which sounds a whole lot less fun than Ocean's 11, but bear with me. Because Sloterdijk argued that cynicism became what it is today due to what he called enlightened false consciousness. Which, there it is, the answer. Guys, we did it. Video over. But you're going to want me to go into what it actually means. False consciousness comes from Karl Marx, which, stay on target, gold leader, we don't actually have to like to find his concept useful. Marx wrote that the reason people accept a system that exploits them is that they don't really understand it. They've been deceived. The ideology is doing its work behind the curtain, and if we could just pull that curtain back, show people the truth, give them the facts, they would be moved to act. They would be outraged. And this isn't just Marx. This is kind of like the entire tradition of the Enlightenment and of Western philosophy even. The idea that knowledge leads to liberation. Show people the wizard and the spell breaks. Sloterdijk's insight is that this model is basically broken because we're not in front of that curtain anymore. The curtain has been well and truly pulled back. We can see the wizard. He's right there. He's tiny. And we've been staring at that wizard for years. We've made memes about the wizard. We've written numerous think pieces about the wizard. We have a comprehensive understanding of the wizard's financial arrangements, personal failings, and political connections. And we carry on as if the curtain were still basically closed. That's enlightened false consciousness. We're enlightened, we see through it. We see behind the curtain, but we're falsely conscious. We act as if we don't. Because somewhere along the way, knowing the truth and acting on the truth kind of came apart from each other. This is almost the story of modernity. And I think that this describes so much about modern life. I know that eating a whole tub of ice cream while watching 30 Rock for the umpteenth time is bad for me, but damned if I'm not going to do it anyway.
I just need 4 numbers. Call anybody in the building. Any random number. Yes, Hornberger!
Hello, you've reached Pete Hornberger, TGS. Please leave a message.
Because, like Pete Hornberger, I'm exhausted. Sloterdijk calls this pattern the open secret. When the ugly truth is already the thing we joke about at dinner parties and nothing changes, the openness itself of that secret, that becomes the lesson. That you can know the truth and it just won't help you. I think we see this in the joke format that the great Jon Stewart pioneered himself. It used to be funny and thrilling when he showed us a public figure saying one thing and then he immediately rolled the tape on them saying the opposite. But now even Jon Stewart has gotten tired of this joke.
Going to the hospital.
I think that's all people mean when they complain about the shamelessness of politics these days. It doesn't even matter when these figures are caught out anymore. It's an open secret that they'll argue the opposite when it suits them and that self-interest trumps principle. And the part I find troubling is that having our worst views about politicians and other people confirmed, that kind of feels good. That, of course, that we say, it again, there's a real comfort in cynicism. And I want to be completely honest about that, because if we pretend that the shrug is purely a thing that's being done to us, we'll miss the critical point of why it sticks, why it's so prevalent, why being right about things being terrible is sort of its own reward. A grim reward, sure, but a reliably enjoyable one, even for a philosopher. And that comfort is where the real damage happens, because open secrets don't just justify our inaction, they justify everything. If all politicians are liars, then it doesn't matter who we vote for. If the whole thing is rigged, then our disengagement isn't apathy, it's realism, it's a reasonable reaction to what's going on. And open secrets don't resolve or build to a reckoning, they just accumulate and stay there. Each one is teaching us the same lesson. We were right not to care about them. The critical question about all of this is, who's benefiting from it? This is where the theorist Mark Fisher comes in, because his answer was, of course, capitalism, which, yep, I know what you're going to say, easiest, laziest, most undergraduate answer ever. But he doesn't mean Adam Smith's idealistic form of capitalism or the way that capitalism is supposed to operate, but this kind of crappy oligarchic version that we all seem to have inherited. That's what Fisher calls capitalist realism. And capitalist realism isn't the argument that the current system is the best one, because that's a position and we could argue with it and we could have debates for and against. That's actually something that could be explored. Instead, capitalist realism is not an argument, but the sense that the current system is the only one, that there are no alternatives. Not that this is good, but that this is basically all there is. And what are you going to do about it? We can debate a claim, but we can't go around debating stuff like gravity or the way things are. And capitalist realism operates at that level. It's just the air we breathe and the water we swim in. But Fisher goes further than Sloterdijk. He argues that the shrug that we have in response to it, that's not neutral. That has beneficiaries. A population that has collectively decided that nothing can change is the most useful population imaginable to certain people. You don't need to censor people who've already decided that speaking up is pointless. And you don't need to crush dissent when the people have already decided for themselves that dissent is just naive. The cynics are going to do it to themselves. Sloterdijk showed us this condition, this knowing but not acting. Whereas Fisher shows us who this is working for. And it is, dare I say it, part of an ideology. Now, I covered a lot of this in our ideology video, which if you're interested, check it out. But there are 4 lenses that we can run over any ideology that I think are really useful. And they are these 4 things. We need to ask ourselves, firstly, which meanings got fixed? Secondly, which concepts got chained together, then which roles became natural, and what emotions are being recruited. And even if you haven't seen the video, we're going to do it. We're going to put those 4 lenses on cynicism and see what we find. Because firstly, we can ask that question, which meanings got fixed? Thinking about the words that cynicism uses. Think about the word realistic, for example. When did that start meaning not realistic, but pessimistic? When did being realistic become code for expecting the worst? Because realistic should mean something like engaging honestly with what's actually there, what's actually in front of us, which could include the possibility that things might be able to be changed or improved, that everything is contingent and there are alternatives. But that meaning within cynicism has been quietly shut down. If someone says, let's be realistic, then what we actually hear under cynicism is, basically, let's lower our expectations. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. That pessimistic definition won so completely that using the word any other way sounds a tiny bit delusional. Same with words like smart. The smart take is the cynical take. The smart money, for example, assumes the worst about human motivation. And the word mature, for example, has been locked to having given up or having accepted. We tell young people to grow up and be realistic and be mature, and what we really mean is stop caring so much, kid. You'll learn. Now, nobody voted on these definitions. They happened upstream of our conversations, and by the time we're using them, the words, they've already done their ideological work. A lot has already been determined. What's possible has already been determined. And secondly, which concepts have been chained together? Because stuff like sincerity has been implicitly linked to naivety. Being sincere is naive under cynicism. Hope is chained to ignorance. Caring too much is chained to stuff like weakness. And those chains are so strong that anyone who still gives a damn about something in public has to do it a little ironically, to get away with it, put a little distance between themselves and actually believing some of those earnest things, with a joke that's loaded in case somebody notices that we might actually mean it. We've all been here, caring about something and then immediately hedging a little about it, saying things like, this might sound naive, but, or look, this probably won't change anything, but we're almost preemptively apologizing for caring about something. That apology is the chains of cynicism as an ideology doing their work. And thirdly, what roles become natural? Because the cynic is the realist, the adult in the room, whereas the person who still believes things could change, well, that's just the sweet summer child who just hasn't been disappointed enough yet to learn. And those roles discipline everyone and everything around them. Even if we feel something, we learn not to show it, because showing it costs us status. We get portrayed as naive. We can be wrong about a fact and we can recover. But being caught caring about something that didn't work out, that's a hard one that we can't come back from. And if you're like me, particularly if you're on YouTube, we can feel this, can't we? We can't be embarrassed if we never cared. So the trick is, according to the cynic, not caring. We can't be wrong if we were only joking. Cynicism isn't just a belief about the world, it's also a reputational strategy. It's a strategy about how to approach the world and not get caught out caring. And what emotions get recruited under cynicism? Well, it's stuff like contempt, superiority. And I'll admit it because I've done it. It's that particular pleasure of saying, called it, of saying, I told you so. And what stuff gets suppressed there? It's stuff like earnestness and vulnerability, the willingness to try or to look foolish or to be caught out. Those feelings don't just get discouraged, they get made shameful, which is hilarious given that cynicism runs on shamelessness. There's that inversion. Again, virtue gets shamed and amorality is shameless. That's a full ideology with its four lenses. It fixes meanings, it chains concept, it assigns roles, and it recruits emotions. And even worse, it presents itself as the most sophisticated ideology going because it tries to convince us that it isn't one. It tries to convince us that it's just being realistic. Now, I've mentioned that this has a business model, and I think this is where cynicism gets more concrete, because this ideology has a distribution system, and we are inside it right now. A thoughtful, nuanced, carefully considered take, like my own, if I do say so myself, something that took real time to think through and come up with, no, that gets no views, that gets no engagement and interaction. It's not interesting, it doesn't stir the emotions. But something saying, hey, this is all bullshit, this is outrage, nothing matters, everyone is the worst. There's money in that. There's a lot of money in that. I've seen it everywhere here on YouTube. The algorithm doesn't really care what's in that video. They just care that we spend as much time as possible engaging with it. And we're humans. Of course we're going to engage more with Alex Jones screaming about the lizard people, even if it's hilarious and stupid, because we can't help it. But that's also cynicism turned into a platform, and it is very profitable. So why don't we do something? Why is it so hard to unsubscribe from cynicism? And while you're at it, why not like and subscribe to this too? I think the honest answer is that it's not really a choice that we can just make. Because it's not that we lack willpower, but because that the conditions that would make that kind of choice possible have been quietly removed from us. Yet more things that have been stolen. And this is where the philosopher Byung-Chul becomes really essential, because he maps what we've actually lost. What we've gained or had forced on us is clear enough. It's stuff like lives of constant measurement, of optimizing our work, and then trying to optimize everything else and feeling bad when we constantly fall short. Our rest has been captured too. Leisure isn't rest anymore, it's recovery, so we can be more productive again tomorrow. I think we all understand this at this point. It's another open secret. But what gets squeezed out is what Han calls the negative rhythms of life. Things like rest, silence, ritual, contemplation, boredom even. The things that don't really produce anything and that themselves can't be directly measured, or at least we're not incentivized to measure. And his argument is that these things aren't luxuries. They are actually the conditions under which we figure out what we think and what we value and what we know and what we want. They're places where convictions form slowly and messily and without a deadline. And without those spaces, stuff like being sincere begins to feel impossible. It's not because we don't want to be sincere, I think most of us do, mostly, but because we're too exhausted to commit to anything that doesn't have an immediate return or helps us now. We can't plan 5 years ahead when we're not even sure about the next 5 months or the next 5 days or even sometimes the next 5 minutes. We cannot sustain a political commitment, for example, for change when we're running on 4 hours sleep and trying to work through the gig economy. And we can't figure out what we actually believe when every spare moment we have has been exploited and colonized by a feed and an algorithm that's asking us to react rather than to think. So something like hope starts to feel like a complete luxury. And it's not because we're cynical intentionally or because we've decided it's irrational. It isn't always. It's just because we don't have the resources to sustain and to nurture it. We're not cynical because we've thought it through. We're cynical because we're completely depleted. And here is what I think is the real cruelty of it. The same incentives that have stripped these spaces from us and that have turned rest into recovery and solitude into loneliness, they then turn around and they mock us and chastise us for being cynical. As if we just woke up one morning and chose to stop caring. They say things like, try harder, bro, be more positive, be more disciplined. The diagnosis from the cynical is always personal when the actual problem, as Han points out, is structural. And that really matters because if we skip it, if we go straight from cynicism is a trap to here's how to escape it, it's all on you, we're just doing the thing that the self-help industry does. And it is the most cynical industry of all. We are treating a structural condition as a personal failing. But Han's diagnosis also does something else, almost accidentally. Because once we see what's been stolen from us, we can also see what needs to be reclaimed. Not as wellness advice, but as demands. Stuff like privacy, a space that is just ours and that isn't monetized or measured or surveilled. And things like rest, which isn't just recovery for more productivity and more exploitation by somebody who employs us. Or recognition that our time should belong to us and that we have a right to it. These aren't luxuries. They are conditions of a meaningful life, and one without cynicism. So what happens when a whole society becomes deeply cynical, particularly about the prospect of anything changing? Well, Sloterdijk has an interesting case study in his critique of cynical reason. And what I was going to do here was do this whole cute thing where I describe the society to you and it's horrible and you think, we're talking about today. But no, it turns out that it's Weimar Germany and the fascists are coming. But that's not quite right. It's too cute by half. We could do a similar analysis of the other side of the spectrum. We could do analysis of Russia before the revolution, or France before its revolution, or a bunch of countries across the political spectrum that have become stagnant and then couldn't solve their problems and then eventually had a pretty catastrophic revolution. Now, you may think that's great. Burn it all down and start again. And well, stay tuned because I'll be doing a video on that soon. But the key point in all of those examples is that cynicism ran rampant. It was responsible for creating the conditions, the tinderbox, because it taught a lot of people that there was no point in doing anything while things got worse. And I'm not going to be a smart aleck here and say we're living in Weimar Germany because that's not how history works. But cynicism paralyzes the middle. And that hollowness, that paralysis, that emptying out of the middle lets the political extremes pour in. Because those people don't suffer from cynicism at all. They may exploit it. They are absolutely certain about the righteousness of their cause, and they're the ones we've really got to worry about. And that's their advantage too. Not that their ideas are necessarily any good, but that they're offering something a cynical culture has made people desperate for. The experience of actually believing in something, of certainties, of being a part of something, of having a purpose that isn't just watching the fire and commenting on it. Sloterdijk points out a few features worth being wary of when cynicism has free rein like this. The first is a political nausea, not an anger, because anger is actually useful. Anger can be directed. Anger can demand change. Nausea is worse. It's the feeling that all politics is dirty, that everyone's the same, and the best move is not to get involved. That even thinking about politics makes us sick, which is completely understandable. I'd much rather that SNL and the late night shows were doing something fun and silly and absurd, talking about weird and funny non-political cultural stuff, like how nobody can have my precious jewels.
They're mine. They're all mine. Mine, mine, mine! And lastly, I wish for a world with more generosity. That's the world I want to live in.
But we don't get that. We get political commentary and jokes. But that nausea, which pushes us towards political disengagement, that leaves the politics to others, often the ones who aren't revolted, but zealous. The centre gradually disappears, and this is where the extremes take over, which I think also explains a lot of the polarization that we experience today, and which, if you're like me, makes you want to run from politics even further. But then there's the distraction, the Jon Stewart position. Sloterdijk picks Weimar because in the depths of the most toxic politics, there was a huge amount of glittering culture and witty people making witty jokes about how terrible things are. We probably would call it decadence now, that being above it all, participating in the culture of cleverness while ignoring what's actually happening. That cleared the ground. It made seriousness feel foolish until the only people left willing to commit to anything were the ones with the most dangerous commitments of all. And that's really interesting to me because it means that the way to fight extremism isn't more cynicism or just pointing out how hypocritical the other side is. Instead, it's something like offering a different vision. An alternative, which is exactly the thing that Fisher says that cynicism makes impossible. But it's again something that's stolen from us that we should reclaim. Because the greatest political weakness of cynicism is that it offers a critique but no alternative. And the cynic might say, well, that's not my job. But they're doing more than that. They're also saying that any alternative would only be worse. They're saying that it's better that you stick with the devil you know than the devil you don't. So that's the trap. That's the mechanism and the ideology, the stolen conditions and all of the historical stakes. And we're sitting in it, all of us, having watched a video about it, which, as Sloterdijk would point out, is exactly what enlightened false consciousness looks like. We know, and knowing has never been the problem. The question is whether we will do anything about it. And this is the part I've been dreading, because every cynical instinct is about to light up and tell us it's naive and sentimental and exactly the kind of rubbish that a sophisticated person like you should see through. But let me try it anyway, without pretending that things are fine and without asking us to just choose hope blindly. Because I think we have a pretty good view of the trap now and how it eventually comes for us all, even the cynics. The leopards will eventually eat their faces too. And to be fair, that's kind of the whole lesson of Succession too. Hopefully this video was a little shorter, although a little less funnier. So what's the alternative? Well, I could just say hope and end the video here, right? But that would actually be the most cynical thing to do. I'd just say to you, have hope and you're on your own, buddy. I'm not going to do that. But I'm also not going to lie to you either. Like, having some hope that a better future is possible is kind of essential. It's just that there's way more to it than that. I think we know this. So thinking this through, I think step one is remembering that outrageous thing that something has been stolen from us. That big C cynicism got perverted into a little c cynicism. So one of the things we can do is start by just stealing that back. Because Diogenes and the cynics, they weren't detached. They were courageous truth tellers. And I know part of the success of little c cynicism is making the term truth teller sound absolutely scammy and ridiculous. But it isn't. We should claim it back by telling the truth and by living that truth too. Now, we all have rent and kids for whatever reason and lives to lead, so dwelling in a barrel isn't for most of us. But we can figure out what we value. We can hold on to that. And we can just be not ashamed of that. Not fear the accusation that we're virtue signaling, because that's another classic cynical move designed to basically make us not have virtues. And we can demand these things for each other too. That's the political point of this. We can demand privacy and dignity and rest, the right not to be exploited. That's Hahn's roadmap. And it's not self-help or self-care, anything cynical like that. It's just plain structural demands. And speaking of stealing lessons, there's Antonio Gramsci, who was writing from a fascist prison when he put it this way: pessimism of the intellect, but optimism of the will, which doesn't mean a slogan like think negative, act positive, like some kind of philosophical life hack. Instead, it means seeing things as clearly, as honestly as we can, including how bad they are, especially how bad they are. That's the pessimism of the intellect bit. The diagnosis should be unflinching and we don't pretend otherwise. But then we act anyway. We have to. Not because the odds are in our favour, but because the alternative is just the shrug. And the shrug was never ours. It's always been somebody else's victory and somebody else's status quo. Because the difference between cynicism and what comes after it isn't optimism. Instead, I really do think it's refusing to let an accurate diagnosis become paralysing, become a reason to just stop trying to change. And here's something we can actually take away from all of this. The next time that shrug shows up, and it probably will, probably before we've even finished reading the comments on this video, just notice how fast that shrug got there. Because if we're already decided that something was pointless before we've even finished hearing about it, then that's not thinking. That's a reflex. And it's worth asking who trained that reflex into us, because it probably wasn't us. Now, I don't know if this video will change anything. The same machinery will process it and file it alongside everything else, alongside another take absorbed and moved on from. And to the algorithm, somebody watching this and feeling something, and someone typing "lol, nothing matters" in the comments, those are pretty much the same thing. But I did it anyway. And you can too. That's the whole point. So until next time, be wise and be kind. And if that shrug shows up again, well, tell it.
Go on, fuck off back there, tumble down dick.